of tonight.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank, for introducing me. I take it everybody can see my screen with the technical meeting 24th of September. First of all, I'll talk a little bit about meeting procedures. I'll introduce AACE International and the AACE Australian section. I'll also before each presentation, introduce parts of the AACE website. And today I'm going to have a look at where you find the total cost management framework and recommended practices. Then we have Lou, who's going to present on effective cost engineering in the project management process. Then we'll have an opportunity to have questions. And then we'll have an open mic session where anybody can talk to anybody. We have about 20 attendees at the moment. I'm sure you can all see each other's names. So first of all, meeting procedures. So all of the attendees should be muted during the presentations. You'll have an opportunity to interact at key points in the presentation. So what will happen is that at the end of each part of the presentation, Lou may stop. And if you have any questions as the presentation is going on, then use the chat feature. You'll see down the bottom there a little button with chat, and type your questions in. And then when Lou stops, Frank will read the questions out for you and Lou will answer them. We'll try to make this webinar available on YouTube after this session. AACE Australian section has their own YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and start and search for AACE Australian section, you'll find our YouTube channel. If you want a certificate of attendance, then please email the secretary and we'll arrange a certificate of attendance to this presentation. So a little bit about AACE. It's AACE stands for the Association for the Advancement of Cost Engineering. It was originally the American Association of Cost Engineers, but they wanted to become international, so they changed the term here. It serves the total cost management community since 1956, so it's been going for about 65 years now, and it's committed to the constructive exchange of ideas between members, the development of technical guidance and education, and recognition of subject matter experts. So at the moment in the AACE Australia, we have a board and we've got most of the positions filled out. Lou, who is presenting, is also the Vice President and also the Queensland Regional Chair. And once we have meetings in each area, he'll be organising them. We have a Membership Secretary, Saleh, he's recently joined us. We have a New South Wales Regional Chair, which is Alberto. For some unknown reason, most of the people come from Victoria, so I'm the President. Yazid is the Treasurer. Training and Development Coordinator is Russell Kenley. The Victorian Chair and Sponsorship and Alliance Director is Raf Dewar. Website and social media is Cameron Baker. We got a Membership Secretary and Events Coordinator is, sorry, the Membership Secretary we're still trying to recruit. We've got an Events Coordinator and a Publications Coordinator. And then our secretary is Karen in Western Australia. So each month I'll draw your attention to part of the website. And if you go to the AACE website and you go to professional and technical resources, under publications, you'll find the total cost management framework and the recommended practices. And I just want to introduce to you what these are. The total cost management framework is a document that you can buy. It's a publication with a systematic approach to managing projects through their life cycle and basically aimed at any enterprise like facilities, projects, products or services. So this is a technical book. And then also a number of recommended practices have been written by members and then tended to be the main foundation of our education, certification, products and services. And there are a large number of practices, so that recommended practices, a series of documents that contain valuable information that has been subject to rigorous review process by a number of people, and they get regularly reviewed, and I've recently reviewed 8 of them myself. They're available free for all AACE members, and they're really worthwhile following these recommended practices. So here's some contacts. This is the contact for AACE in the US, and that's their website. Or if you want to contact us in Australia, then this is the email address and this is our website. So I'd like to welcome Lou Vidotto to present effective cost engineering in the project management process. This webinar will look at the skills of a cost engineer, or the skills required of a cost engineer to understand both what their role is and their contribution to the project management process. A little bit about Lou. He's a very experienced person. He's had 40 years of project study and delivery experience as an engineer, manager, and executive in Australia and internationally. He's worked in numerous projects in mining, mineral processing, oil refining, rail and infrastructure projects in all phases, and he's been active in developing project controls and estimating training. So effective cost engineering project management, I would now like to hand over to Lou. So I'm going to stop sharing and Lou should then start sharing his screen.
Good evening, everybody. I take it you can see the slides up on the screen at the moment.
Yes, I can, Lou.
Okay, terrific. So a bit of background to myself. Has the slide moved on, Paul? I'm a bit unsure here. Yep. So I have a bit of background to me. I've got over 40 years experience on projects. I'm pretty passionate about training and also too as part of our business to share my experience and knowledge and provide basic skills to our profession. I know there's been a lot written about project controls at the moment, but I fundamentally believe that the basic skills that we've got are valid and have been for a very long time. So agenda for tonight, basically an introduction. I'd like to go through a case study on a project that I worked on a number of years ago and talk about the issues that we encountered through the study and then the execution phase, and then how we handled it or didn't handle it. I certainly want to go through some of the project management processes. I would like to go through some of the project controls processes. And then also too, I'd like to share a survey of project controls effectiveness that was done about 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, where we interviewed a number of people about what they thought was good or not about project controls. And I'll go through.
Louis, I'm not sure, but it's not showing the correct slide, I think. Is everybody showing only the effective cost engineering on the main slide, right?
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It's funny.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll go through the survey of project controls effectiveness that we took about 8 or 10 years ago, where people sort of said, this is what I think, this is what is lacking. And although it was done 8 years ago, I think it's pretty valid even now. Some of the other things I do is just provide some solutions and then open up for questions. Certainly use the chat session to ask questions. I'll have a bit of a break after the case study where we can actually answer some of those questions and move on from there. AACE, Paul gave a pretty good definition of the association. They define and adhere to total cost management. Everything relates back to costs. AACE combines all project controls function as cost engineering. And Bourne and Weaver in 2013 defined a project controls professional as a project controls manager, estimating, cost engineering, planning and scheduling, and risk analysis and management. For this session, I will refer to project controls as the whole of our profession. And I think that sort of encompasses everyone who works in the different parts of what we consider project controls. So the last 20 years has seen a global resources and infrastructure boom, and including Australia. There's been some tremendous achievements. There's a number of significant projects that have experienced significant cost and schedule overruns. The failure rate or the number of projects that fail to meet cost, schedule and performance targets ranges from sort of 68 to 90%. Alberto kindly last month put up a slide that showed worldwide project performance, and it's pretty frightening. In North America, 55% of projects in North America are facing delays, 74% in Europe, 71% in Latin America, 82% in Africa are facing delays, Middle East. And here in Australia, where we live, in our region, 80% of projects are facing delays. So it's a pretty scary statistic. So why is this so? So what I'd like to look at tonight briefly is some of the issues associated with project studies and delivery, and in particular, the role of project controls in the project process. I maybe offer some solutions, and certainly, as I said, I'll share a project control survey that we did and look at a case study. The role of project controls is, I believe, fundamental to the success of a project. And as members of AACE and our various project controls organisations, we're quick to identify what needs to be done and what goes wrong and what else. But it's part of a process, and I certainly want to tonight stress the interface between project controls and project management. And I think that's fundamentally and pretty important. What takeaways do I want for tonight for the attendees of this webinar? I'd certainly like to reinforce the role to be played by project controls. I'd certainly like to stress the need for improved skills, and certainly highlight the critical interface between project managers and project controls. Certainly, if you have questions or comments, please shoot them through, and we'll address them as we go through tonight. In my experience over 40 years, having worked on a number of fairly large projects and with fairly large companies and small, that interface between the project manager and the project controls team, where that's worked well, the project has generally gone better. Where the project managers have not realised how to use our skills, the projects tend to not go so well and come up with issues. And I'd certainly like to talk a bit more about that tonight. A mentor of mine a number of years ago said that a successful project is one where there are no surprises. What does he mean by that? What do I mean by that? Is that any project is going to have issues. Any study is going to have issues. The key thing to realise and accept is that if you are able to identify where things are varying or going away from the approved schedule or budget or execution strategy, and you're able to highlight that quickly, then the steering committees and the boards, whoever, are able to deal with it. where projects get into trouble is where they get surprised. I'm sorry, Mr. Board Member, the project's overrunning schedule by 3 months, and we've already, and it's going to overrun by another 6 months, or look, we've run out of budget or going to run out of budget next month. That's what causes grief. And stakeholders really struggle with finding out that things have gone astray after they've already happened. So I believe that our role as project controls people is to highlight issues that are coming up, and then offering solutions on how we actually mitigate those issues. Excuse me. Problems with studies and projects. One of the main things that I've found over my career is that you often get quite poor definition in studies. You often get poor scope and quantification issues. We've recently been involved in a study, and the scope wasn't defined by the time we had to cut the estimate and the schedule for the project. So there's a mismatch, and so it leads to not being sure about what you're trying to estimate, schedule, and eventually build. Inadequate project design. The basic designs at various levels of the studies are not documented enough, and they haven't addressed what the project parameters really want you to address. Uncontrolled changes because the baselines have not been established. And I'll talk a lot about that as we go through tonight. Uncontrolled changes to operating parameters. Very often when you're building a project, whether it's a resources project or an railway project, there are various parameters that you're required to meet, which are set at the start of the project. As soon as you vary away from those, then you start getting changes in scope creep and schedule and estimate variances, which may or may not be documented. So in terms of studies and projects, I always talk about, and again, a mentor of mine talked about the 4 pillars of a project. And he talked about those pillars being scope, description, execution strategy, a schedule, and an estimate, with the WBS as the glue. So what does that mean? Is that any type of project you're going to study and build, you need to have the scope documented by WBS, which basically says this is what we're going to build and what it looks like and the capacities, etc. What is execution strategy tell you? How we're going to build that scope. And an execution strategy defines whether you're going to have an EPCM or going to have an owner delivered project, or an EPC or a PPP. And then the schedules and the estimate are a reflection of the scope and the execution strategy. And unless those 4 hang together, you start getting mismatches between what finally gets approved at the end of a study, a feasibility study, to go into execution phase. And of course, the WBS is the glue. The WBS is the driver for documenting every part of your project. Even in a study, early parts of a study, the WBS might not be defined down to a very detailed level, but it's certainly defined at some level. Setting a WBS at the start or during a study phase of a project also then means that you can interface with finance to start to develop what the asset register looks like. I'd like to go through a case study of a project that I worked on a number of years ago. and just talk about what happened and what didn't happen. So in the pre-feas and the feasibility study, the project was determined that it was going to be on an EPCM basis. Operations readiness would be provided by the owner, seconding personnel out of operations who would then come into the team to start to get ready to commission and operate. The contractor would purchase bulk materials, all the steel, the pipe, the cable ladder, etc. All major equipment would be purchased by the EPCM on behalf of the owner. So the study was sound and used a gating system. So that all went pretty well at the start. What happened was when the project got through the gate to go into execution phase, the execution strategy was changed. It went to a self-perform by a dedicated owner's delivery team. It changed from stick-built to modularized basis. The project director believed that he could significantly improve the scheduled delivery time for the project. So he said the way to do it would be to modularize it and bring in modules rather than do it stick-built. Suddenly, the owner's delivery team had to purchase materials and equipment. Seconded operations personnel were brought into the delivery team, diluting the ability for them to then do operations readiness and get ready for operations. The project then used the in-house engineering team to do all the detail engineering. So the fast start was to achieve schedule gains, but the issue was the project was cost sensitive, not schedule sensitive. So in the drive to improve the schedule, the cost blew out. So the impacts. The in-house engineering team were not experienced for a mega project, and it was a $1 billion plus project. They had to re-engineer the plant for modules, and at the same time, because the schedule was shortened, there was a severe overlap between the modularization construction and the engineering. So that what happened was they were making modifications to the modules as they were being loaded onto the ship to come to the site. There were huge quantity blowouts. As the engineers cut up the plant into modules, they suddenly realized that they had to increase the amount of bracing steel and cut columns and double up columns. So there was a significant quantity. Cables suddenly had to be routed to inefficiently so they could hook up to the other parts of the modules. So that caused a lot of issues. Owner purchased materials and equipment. There was a revised procurement plan that hadn't been estimated. For example, the revised delivery strategy said that we would buy bulk steel plate, fabricate structural steel. We would buy pipe and fabricate pipe spools, etc. As far as our team was concerned, we couldn't allocate the budget to say, okay, we were going to buy 600 tons of plate steel. But because the estimate hadn't been estimated that way, we couldn't tell. We had to go back and try and carve out the supply cost of plate, for example, out of a structural steel cost. And it was very, very inefficient. Seconded operations personnel were brought in, and as part of the owner's team, they decided to fix a lot of brownfields issues that they had at the site. and it was not documented. It was not picked up in the change management. So there was scope creep. Construction mobilised too early for a modularised plant. The success of a modularised plant is that the design and construction are done off-site and then brought to site and put on their pads and then hooked up. So what the project did was actually start to mobilise the construction workforce at the very start. And so you actually had very inefficient construction labour because they were basically sitting around at site waiting for the major modules to come. So they started actually site constructing small pipe spools and small bits. So it blew out the construction estimate significantly. I remember that the budget direct hours for the project was about 1.75 million. By the time construction started, that the estimate that we worked up was that the direct work hours were going to be 3 million. And that caused all sorts of angst, and we never actually recovered that. So outcomes. Engineering didn't have enough time to resource up or engineer or rescope for modules. Project controls didn't have the baseline set to run the change management program. The schedule blew out. There was very poor progress reporting. There was poor budget allocation. Weren't able to allocate budget on a scope for scope basis. Contracting and purchasing plan changes, cost blew out. And the significant thing was that there was poor support of the controls team by the project management team in the drive to build things as quickly as possible. The materials management part of the project was pretty loose. So the project actually bought materials 2 and 3 times over, rebuilt spools that were actually built and then had to be was still in the process of being engineered and had to rebuild. So it was quite a poor project. So what's the relevance? There was a severe disconnect between project management, contracts, materials management, construction, and project controls. Progress, forecasting, and external reporting were haphazard and unreliable, and it was very stressful to the team and to the owner. There was severe cost blowouts, severe schedule delays. The project was never finished. They cut it off at some stage and at one stage and created a number of smaller repair projects. But as a result, the production nameplate was never achieved. So what should have happened? A good project practice would say that once the project changed the execution strategy in line with the approved baseline, that the project should have stopped and re-estimated the execution strategy, documented it, and redone the estimate and the schedule. It did not happen. So that was certainly for me, that was one of the most difficult projects that I've actually worked on. And it goes to show that as project controls personnel, unless we have the documented information, it's very difficult for us to do our job. And certainly we're always coming from behind the 8 ball to actually report progress, develop the quantitative progress reporting. and also to give the information to the project manager to say this is what really needs to be done. I remember that on the progress reporting, I would report back to the project director, reporting the severe blowout in the direct hours and the progress achieved because of the wasted time on site. And there was no attempt really to try and rectify the situation. It was just full steam ahead, wait for the modules, let's get on with it. We've got to build it as quickly as we can. So that was quite difficult. Are there questions at this stage? This is probably part of a logical place to see if there are questions. Quite happy to take questions from anyone at this stage, or otherwise I can move on.
I just have one comment, with a question. It says, thanks for the case study, great points. In my career as a project controls manager, I have been disappointed to see that many project controls professionals play a passive role in the projects companies and do not proactively support lead projects and project manager. What has been your observation in this regard?
So in my experience, project controls managers are key to the success of a project. And the project manager and the project controls manager are probably, the relationship needs to be very, very tight. I know on projects that where I've worked, I would sit outside the project director's door, and I would be pretty much his eyes and ears for the project. So there was formal reporting. There was also informal reporting. As project controls people, you pick up a lot of information by talking to the engineers and talking to the contracts people, talking to your own team, and you pick up snippets of stuff that may not come through in formal reporting, but it certainly starts to paint a picture of where there looks like being weaknesses or issues, and then discussing those with the project manager and coming up with a solution or a way to actually mitigate some of those if they're real. The change management program, we call them trends, the trend program, is the forum for documenting those changes, whether they're actually, and the change management program that you implement is not always about cost and schedule, it's about issues. Where, for example, on that case study I was just talking about, if I know that we bought steel 2 and 3 times for a particular module. So the idea of the change management program is to highlight that and say, look, we've got pretty poor materials management in that area, and this looks like being the impact. And anything like that is really to be documented. Does that answer the question?
I think it does. It does answer the question. We'll go with one more question, and then we are going to keep going.
Yeah.
A great case study. We know that change to execution to a strategy does not happen at a point in time. It rather creeps through incremental changes and goes off track. What is your views on how to monitor such creep?
You've really got to, at the end of the feasibility studies, where you actually lock in the execution strategy and the estimate and the schedule. And we all know that changes still do occur after that. But the fact that you've got a baseline documented means that you've got a basis for identifying change. And that applies to each of those, the 4 pillars. The scope, which says what you're going to build, and it might not be the final, and very often it isn't the final design. And same with the execution strategy. You're going to have changes going along. You might split some contracts. You might change the way you do some of the engineering, but at least it's documented. And then the estimate and the schedule certainly are a reflection of that. For example, scope. when we build an estimate for a major project, for example, we try and tag it out to work packages. And my experience is that when engineering produce a request for quotation package, that's the time when you can actually compare it back to what the estimate had tagged out for that scope of work. And it tells you whether the engineers have changed the scope of that work package or not. And it often leads to identifying that you're going to have field work packages, or you're going to have variations. And then that enables you then to assist with the forecasting. So having the 4 pillars baseline doesn't mean you're not going to get change, but you're going to have an ability to identify changes from those baselines.
Yeah, thanks, Says. Okay. I think we should keep going. We're still having some more questions that we are going to approach at the end.
Sure. Okay, so the project management process. So a project consists of, excuse me, engineering and contracts and purchasing and construction and human resources and operations readiness, finance and accounting and pre-production. So where do project controls fit? They fit as right slap bang in the middle of all of the function in a project. There's an interface, obviously, with engineering because of quantities and scope. There's an interface with contracts because you want to make sure that what's being contracted out or put out for purchase and or contracting matches what's in the scope of your project. Pre-production, very often, that's an area where the operations people want to get ready to operate. We did a review of a project a number of years ago, and it was fairly well advanced. And what happened was that the forecast for the project was in pretty good shape because they'd identified claims and they'd identified all of the work left to go. The one area where we thought there was something funny going on was pre-production and operations readiness. So what came back from the client was that they were underrunning the budget. But in actual fact, when we analysed it, they weren't underrunning; they were running late. So that the gearing up of operations and getting ready to take the plant over was running 3 months adrift from construction. So what happened was that they were so there was a real mismatch, and that was one of the things that we identified. So project controls need to understand that those sort of things happen as well. Certainly an interface with finance and accounting, where finance and accounting handle the cash, and we make sure that what is approved for payment matches what the progress of the job really is. Construction. Construction is all about achieving quantities installed in the field, and also to resources used to install those quantities. So the development of productivity factors and rates of construction enables project controls to forecast where construction is going to end, and then obviously the interface with the schedule. So project controls, they fit slap bang in the middle of all the departments. And I think as a project controls professional, you need to learn what those interfaces are and how to work them. The project management process. There's often a poor interface between project management and project controls. The situation is not atypical of projects in the last 10 to 15 years in our country. Some of the issues, certainly the understanding of the interface between departments, the understanding of project delivery models. Projects invariably have a different way of being executed, whether it's EPCM or EPC, or self-perform, or lump sum / unit rates. Each of those different delivery models require a different solution in terms of how you man up to do that work and how you contract it out. And I think it's important that people understand that. The other thing too is in the project management process is procedures. How often have people been on a job where the procedures aren't in place? And where an owner might say, oh, we're going to use the contractor's procedures. So, but the owner needs procedures to actually understand how they're going to behave in their relationship with their contractors. And I certainly, I put the last bullet point in, the unwillingness of some companies to invest in training. I think that's a key thing, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. Some project management issues. Project managers are often underexperienced and underskilled. And it's not to say that they're not capable, and I'm certainly not suggesting that at all. Project managers don't always build that relationship with project controls. I believe that project managers are often promoted too quickly, so that they're put in a position of failing. There's a desire for people to be termed a project manager, and I think that often too that comes with the responsibility of knowing how to actually run your project, and I think that often happens, that sometimes that happens too quickly. Project managers are not made accountable for their performance, and certainly the other one too, they're not mentored. Project managers are key for project delivery along with project controls, but they need the guidance. A colleague of mine was running a project managers school in one of the international EPCM companies, and he said that young engineers were put in charge of studies or projects with very little training and or mentoring, and they were failing. So that's not really acceptable, and I think that it's something that we as an industry need to pay more attention to. So what gives the project or study a better chance of success? The project managers really need to be on board from the start of the planning study phase. One of the companies that we work for at the moment are certainly doing that, to bringing the project manager on early, right from the start of the study, so that they can run through the study, through the gating and into the project. So tick. Make sure the study documentation is clear and in form that can be easily understood and tracked against. So the 4 pillars. Transparency. If things are going astray on your project, in terms of no surprises, I think it's the responsibility of the project manager to highlight to the stakeholders that there are issues. I've certainly been in the situation where project managers will say, look, we'll fix it up internally, we'll actually do this and do that to try and get back on schedule or budget, and it doesn't always work. So you end up going in front of the board and saying, oh, we've overspent the money or we're overspent the time. So transparency is a big thing for me. Make sure that delivery parameters are clear. Projects are most often either cost sensitive or schedule sensitive, and not always both. You can afford to spend more money to achieve your schedule, or you can take longer to alleviate some cost expenditure. But that needs to be clear, and it needs to be in the project management plan. Again, make sure that to baseline the key documents, the 4 pillars at each stage of development, and then make sure there's clear lines of accountability. What gives the project better chance at success? Set up the relationship between the departments and the functions. Make sure in the jigsaw puzzle I put up previously, make sure that each of those departments talk to each other and understand what the specific needs are of each department. Set up clear, transparent and reporting stakeholder engagement, and certainly employ professional project controls personnel who know what to do, who are trained and can actually perform the proper function of project controls on the job. Some project controls issues. Impact of poor project controls on the success of a project delivery, it's well documented. And poor project controls is not people, not poor people, it's poor processes and undeveloped processes and not implemented processes. A lot of project controls people are underskilled and inexperienced. A big one for me is that it's very important for project controls people to work on site so that you can see how things are built, how concrete's poured, how cables are pulled, how steel's put up, so that you have an appreciation when you're back and doing forecasting in your home office or wherever. You say, oh shit, I know how to pour concrete, and what the contractor's telling me now for progress doesn't make sense. So it's gaining that experience. Poor investment in training, and again, a lack of mentoring of junior engineers. The project controls process. I picked up this quote somewhere, and it says, in assurance-based departments such as project controls, success needs to be measured by the ability to forecast costs and time and project what issues will occur and how the cost-time penalties can be mitigated. And I'll talk a bit more about that now. So I talk about ECAR when I do training, and I say the 5 elements of the project controls process are: establish the project baselines, which I think I've certainly stressed that. Collect information, collect progress information, collect cost information, etc. Change information, analyze it. What does it mean, the information that I have? So this is my information to date. What does it mean going forward? Recommend a solution. Okay, you might realize that your productivity factor is really poor on a particular element of the project. How are we going to recover? What would we do to actually get back on track? And maybe you can't get back on track. Maybe the schedule has to slip, or the budget has to actually show a variance. And then report the outcomes. Certainly my experience recently is that the analyze and recommend a solution is this part of our skill as project controls professional. We should really be focusing on it really strongly, so that we add value to the project management process. What is the project controls role? Certainly the change management program. Implement it and run it, find out information and actually deliver that to the project team. Change management is not only about variance in scope or cost and schedule. It's about changes to scope or changes to execution strategy. And picking up early enough so that the project can deal with it or not. Quantity and deliverables progress measurement with resource usage. So quantitative progress measurement. For example, putting up some structural steel. It's how much of the steel have you put up and what effort has taken to put it up to that stage. And therefore, what does it look like to finish off that work? quantity tracking out of your engineering. Engineering changes are going to occur. Pick up the quantity changes that are occurring, set up that quantity tracking program and put it into your change management. Regular package-based forecasting of time and cost. Again, how much is that work package done? How long is it taking? And what does it need to finish? Set up the reporting, certainly at various levels, external, internal, ad hoc reporting. Run the risk register. We tend to produce risk registers and then review it every month or every 3 months. Whereas the risk register really is about mitigating those risks and being able to say, okay, and then doing away with the contingency amount assigned to those risks. Forecast contingency. Contingency is obviously not the bucket to actually pick up your changes, your ups and downs. It's an account in its own right, which says, here we are at the project, at this stage of the project, how much contingency do I need to go? How many of the risks have I mitigated? How far through engineering am I? What's my procurement process looking like? I remember on a project a number of years ago, during high inflation on copper and steel, that every month we were starting to overrun the forecast, particularly in purchase of equipment. And we realized that it was because of the increasing cost of steel and copper. So we did a trend, a change for that work. And we went through all of the equipment that had to be bought, all of the bulks that had to be bought, and we did a forecast, and we then analysed it, and we also analysed the contingency. We went back to the steering committee and we said, we think the project, it was about a $1,200 million job, and we estimated the cost due to the increase in steel and copper would add another 120 million. And the project director said, I can't do that. And I said, well, you either do it once now and get it over and done with, or it's going to happen by 1,000 cuts. And then we reforecast the contingency as well. The project controls progress, certainly the work breakdown structure, which drives the scope, the cost, the schedule, asset registers, which is important to the operations. Budget allocations must be scope for scope, not dollar for dollar. If I'm buying a new telephone, a new phone, mobile phone, for example, how much in the budget did I have for that phone? It might cost me $1,000, but I might have only had $500 in the budget for it. So that drives change. Defining how commitments are to be broken down to enable monitoring for progress. One of the things that I find as project controls is that when we set up contracts to go out for pricing, it's important that the project controls people have input into how that contract's set up. So to be able to get a comparison of the pay items in the contract or the purchase order back to the pay items in the budget, and also too, so that we can measure for progress and measure for quantity. And I'm finding more and more that doesn't happen. So that's another example of the close interface between contracts and project controls. Measuring progress, I've already talked a little bit about. Forecasting of work to go by package, I've already talked a little bit about. The project control survey that we did. So we actually sampled globally and Australia and within our own Vidotto Group company. And so you see that almost overwhelmingly that controls seem to be lacking within the industry, and not doing their job. A poor change control system, and you'll be able to have a look at this in your own time. Agree that the work breakdown structure is not being set up correctly. Poor project reporting, poor monitoring and reporting measures in place, Recognition that project controls is a specialised discipline, etc. So what does that mean? Some of the common themes that were identified: certainly poor effort in estimation and preparation of studies, inexperienced personnel across the board, lack of training, shortage of project controls personnel and teams was certainly something that I picked up. We tend to undercook the level of effort on a project for project controls and undercook the amount of resources required. And certainly projects are all different. Small projects can't afford a full-time person. Large projects have to have a decent level of effort. Poor project processes, procedures, and certainly failure to manage change. From the survey, there's a general belief that project controls are not being effective. We're finding that project controls professionals aren't clear about what their deliverables are. Again, analyse information, recommend a solution. Solutions. Training and mentoring of project controls should be a priority of our profession. Promote to companies the increased value by having certified project controls professionals in their teams. Training should consist of formal classroom or webinar sessions and on-the-job training. Professionals need to certify their skills, and I can't recommend enough the importance of AACE and the work that they're doing. And a common understanding of the skills that are required, certainly AACE practices. And I certainly, again, I can't recommend enough to make use of the recommended practices. Training to focus on how to be effective and why it's important. Send our young professionals to site and learn firsthand how commodities are being supplied and installed. The benefits of training and mentoring become immediately apparent when you observe the inefficiencies within industry. This lack of training is creating professionals unable to implement the basics. And every senior project controls professional and manager should be involved in some sort of mentoring on the job, with constant reinforcement that the project controls function is critical to the success. That's the end of my presentation, and certainly open to questions now.
We're having the next question. What is, in your view, the difference in role scope between cost engineers, project controls, and quantity surveyor, and which do you see as more common in the Australian market?
Quantity surveyors, if you go into Europe and Great Britain, for example, quantity surveyors certainly tend to do a lot of the work that project controls do in Australia. In Australia, quantity surveyors are generally involved in quantity measurement and quantity verification, although that's being greyed out at the moment. The quantity surveyors are starting to do some of the work that we would traditionally do. We tend not to be involved in detail so much into in quantity takeoffs and quantity measurement for payment and quantity verification. But certainly, I think in Australia there is a difference between the two disciplines or the two professions.
Okay, we're having the next question. Apart from the technical skills, what complementary skills would you recommend project controls professionals to gain or improve?
I would recommend to every project controls professional to do some sort of public speaking to actually improve their communication skills and getting their message across.
Perfect. And well, we are running out of time, but we have one more question here. Alberto asked, what can we do in Australia to change the view that project controls can be replaced by accounting resources?
That's an issue for me. I think there's a dilution of what we do and an overlap with accounts payable. I think as a profession, we've just got to promote that we don't process invoices. And that our value is certainly forecasting of cost and progress. And certainly, if you look at a monthly cost report, for example, that is produced, the one column that is ours to own is the forecast at completion. And it's certainly, as us more experienced people, we've got to certainly promote that and make sure that when we talk to people, companies, that we actually stress the fact that we're not cost accountants, we're actually we're project controls professionals.
Okay, okay, we can cover one more question and it will be the last one before closing the webinar. Can a planning engineer take over the full role of a project control?
Yes, provided they have an understanding of what each of the disciplines of project controls are. If I look at my experience, I certainly started off as a cost engineer, and I certainly done a lot of estimating. My planning and scheduling skills are okay, but certainly that of the three components, that would be my weakest. But you've got to know how to plan in order to be able to be a project controls manager, and you've got to be able to actually run cost and know about cost engineering to be a project controls manager.
Okay, so thank you everyone for attending our webinar. I will be closing the recording now to start with the open microphone session, and we can discuss any topic you wish.